Singapore has set up its first social service program dedicated to the needs of transnational families. These are families where not every member is a citizen or permanent resident. The program will provide social and legal help, particularly to those that are lower income but don't have access to aid. Nikhil Kata reports.
This centre in Delta Road is where some transnational families can come to if they need help. With one spouse not a Singaporean and therefore not eligible for government subsidies, some face high costs for basic services such as healthcare. And expenses rack up if they are children who are not citizens as well.
The price of education, even in the local school system, is quite high, and I would say unaffordable for our members within the community. Even the PR rates at times are also unaffordable, and that's why the Inclusive Fund Committee was very keen to support those children. We didn't want a case where children wouldn't be accessing education, and then the gap between them being able to catch up to their peers would be that much wider.
Over the last 3 years, the Inclusive Fund has supported 123 people in such families. More than 4 in 10 were foreigners. Pro Bono SG says they are particularly vulnerable as they don't know where to go for support. The charity is providing legal advice at the centre to supplement what social workers do. This includes navigating immigration challenges or supporting those going through divorce.
I love the partnership that we have, which is social-legal, because sometimes the best answer is not the legal answer, but it's actually the practical answer. So it's about this dynamic collaboration with a like-minded partner and one who is mission-aligned to be able to reach out in a meaningful way to these families who may be struggling or in some cases in distress.
Launching the Transnational Family Care Centre, Minister Indrani Raja says there's a growing number of such families in Singapore. 1/3 of citizen marriages in recent years involved a foreign spouse.
So these families add to the diversity of our population. They've made Singapore a home and they are contributing to our society. And many of them have children who are Singapore citizens. They could be relatives, our friends, our neighbours, or even in our own families. And as Singaporeans, all of us play a role in welcoming these new members of Singapore families and supporting them and helping them to integrate into our society.
Ms. Indrani adds the government will continue working with community partners to help transnational marriages build a strong foundation.
Now, for more on this, I'm now joined by Gregory Vijayendran, chairman of Pro Bono SG. That's a legal aid charity. And also with us is Sandhya Aswani from the Inclusive Fund, a financial program that works with these families. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Let's start with you, Mr. Gregory. Why are transnational families not able to access national legal aid schemes easily?
Well, it's a function of national policy, and most nations would have to draw a bright line based on the limitations of resources that could be rolled out in terms of help. And it's not unusual for Singapore, like many other nations, to do so. In that sense, it's a halo distinction, but that, of course, practically means that for this demographic, the transnational families, oftentimes they're in a quandary. And especially if you're vulnerable and indigent, you could be sometimes even in a distressed situation because you want to have meaningful access to healthcare and meaningful access to justice, to name two important aspirations.
So what kinds of legal help do these families normally request for, and how do you assess the kind of needs that they are asking for?
So in terms of what we are seeing, and the beauty is that, this collaboration that we have that resulted in the launch of our Transnational Family Care Centre has actually been in place for 1.5 years. And we've had that privilege of working with South Central Community Family Service Centre over that time. What we're seeing is, at least in terms of the ground, practical areas surface, such as, for instance, questions on education, questions on housing, immigration, financial matters, and especially in the context of families with children and the kinds of needs that would be involved in terms of those families in particular. In the context of law, what surfaces often as top of the list are family law questions. And so sadly, when you have situations where a transnational family is broken up, then in the case of some of the foreign spouses, especially for those who are without means or very modest means, they require legal guidance and representation for divorce and ancillary matters. Some are in situations of abuse, violence, even where they need to apply to court for personal protection orders. And they would, of course, need to do this in a way that is in tandem with the social services that are available to help them. And that's where I think the conundrum is. How can one do this in an integrated way, in a multidisciplinary way, in a way that draws on the expertise of different disciplines? And that's the beauty of what we're seeing here in our Transnational Family Care Center. So that's top of the area. We also have areas like adoption. We have areas, such as even rights involving children, and of course, immigration.
Right. So, Ms. Sandhya, we understand that you are working with a few foundations and donors for the Inclusive Fund. What are some common types of financial help that these families need?
Yeah, so we work with primarily 4 donors, Ishtolaram Foundation, the Kewal Ramani Foundation, the Diana Co Estate, and a private donor. We typically see a range of needs. The fund primarily started in 2021 when we noticed that we found some children that were out of school. Some of us were volunteering at South Central FSC. And so primarily the impetus for the fund was finding school children who were unable to afford their school fees. Families could often spend up to 1/3 to half of their monthly income on school fees, given that these were non-Singaporean children and they don't benefit from the kinds of subsidies that we Singaporeans do. Other kinds of costs may be things around healthcare. We have cases where both spouses may be working, the Singaporean and the non-Singaporean spouse, but the non-Singaporean spouse was diagnosed with kidney failure and needed dialysis, so his dialysis fees cost more than their monthly household income. Those are some of the examples we have. We also have cases where there are legal fees, and other education and health-related costs. So the fund has primarily been to serve these families as they navigate their dreams and aspirations over the long term.
So some of these cases, they sound dire, but in your experience, what happens when they don't get the help that they need?
So we tend to position the fund as almost like a last resort fund. We basically work with the families who have already exhausted all of their options. And so that can often mean things like, maybe they're unable to pay the school fees. Sometimes they rack up debt and arrears. And we've seen some families rack up about tens of thousands of dollars in debt, which can be a huge burden for the families to carry. We've also seen family members who are unable to access healthcare, so they don't go when they need critical treatments. In some cases as well, we have family members who are faced with deportation or needing to travel to get their visas renewed to come back because they have a hard time navigating the legal system. And that's where our partnership with Pro Bono SG has been so powerful as well in helping these families navigate the system, both from the social worker's perspective and the lawyer's perspective.
All right, Mr. Gregory, before we go, why should we care about the plight of such families?
Yes, that's a question that can be answered at many levels. And at one level, we know how important the values of diversity, equality, inclusiveness, and belonging are to us, core pillars of Singapore society. And we also have the aspiration in our pledge, our national pledge, about a democratic society based on justice and equality. And so those are aspirations for us as a society. But, we also know that in the context of Singapore, and particularly in terms of the work that we're trying to do with our Transnational Family Care Center, a number of families in Singapore, and I think the number is something like 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 marriages are transnational ones. And so we could have a family member, a relative, a friend, a neighbor, who would be a transnational family. They're contributing to Singapore. They are actually helping us to build our society, but they have got some very acute needs in some situations. And the question is, as they fall through these cracks, who's there to help catch them? And to do so in a way that's integrated and sustainable. And it's something that we should care about because it involves dignity, it involves respect, and it involves trying to bring about meaningful access to justice for them.
Thank you both for that insightful interview. That was Gregory Vijayendran from Pro Bono SG and Sandhya Aswani from TIF. Thank you.